Hey guys, this is James from TeaDB. You may recognize Garrett from the previous episode. So today we are not, we're going to drink a little bit of tea, but we're mainly going to be talking about Pu'erh Storage. You guys have all had the opportunity to see my storage, but we're going to be talking about what Garrett does.
Yeah.
So we are here in Seattle, Washington. That's also where I live. Tell me a little bit about like how you are storing your tea. Like we have a bunch of different devices in front of us. Explain some of that to me.
Sure. So, starting out when I was first getting into Pu'erh, I was really curious, as I think a lot of people are, about all of the various ways you could age Pu'erh. Can you just leave it like on your like kitchen counter and like have it just sit there? Do you need to like ziplock it or do something special with it? And as I delved further in, I was starting to like kind of explore different areas of like pumidor setups. Basically like, you know, humidors that have been modded. Instead of like cedar wood, it's just like a refrigerator or something with like a gasket to kind of seal in air.
And humidors, for those of you that are not familiar, are like sort of a method to store cigars, right?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a way, because cigars you want to maintain a certain humidity as well, or I think they'll dry out, is my understanding.
Yeah, they're not as enjoyable.
Humidors is like sort of a cute term that's a riff off of humidors.
You got it,
yeah.
Yep.
Okay, continue.
So when I was researching all that, for me, I was very conscientious about like my overall Pu'erh collection. I didn't want it to get too big too fast. So I knew that a lot of the kind of like refrigerator setups were probably not for me, especially since I'm in a small kind of space here in Seattle. And I wanted to be able to have my setup kind of move around. So I started looking into kind of just having crocks and other kind of ceramic storage devices. And from there, I kind of, that's kind of where I was for like a while, probably like a year or two.
Okay. And how did that crocks setup work out for you? And for those of you guys probably can't see it right now, but there are some crocks behind me that Garrett was using, or you are still using a little bit of them for storage.
Yeah, so right now, so when I first got into it, I was really excited about crock storage because I could monitor my cakes and have a couple different environments. So I had them segregated by like ripe and raw, so that way I could kind of maintain the flavors of both of those type of teas.
So you had a crock for ripe and a crock for raw.
You got it, yes.
Okay,
yeah. While I was doing that, I found that especially in the summer months here, when it gets a little drier, probably about, as it is kind of right now in this room, between like 45 and maybe 55% relative humidity, I was having to add like a great deal of water to these setups. And initially what I was doing was just kind of getting like a small pail of water and sticking it in my crock, like on a piece of like Tupperware, so that way it wouldn't be actually touching the cake. This I found increased the humidity greatly, but also too quick and too much. So I'd get up to 80. And there was a period before I went on like did some traveling, and I came back and it was like my ripe crock had completely bloomed per se, and I found myself kind of like being like, this is a bit much. I had to go in probably about every 4 or 5 days and add water to my little setup, and kind of I've had to tone it down in a way. So I found myself kind of going full circle and looking at kind of like refrigerator storage, looking at old kind of wine coolers. I did some research online, and I found that there's this Cuisinart wine cooler that has a bad fan, and so you'll be able to find them like in a lot of places, like thrift stores and such. So I went to Goodwill, and I acquired one of these. And I started using it, and it's great because it maintains the humidity for much longer. I can go for probably about a 10-day period and not even touch the water that I add to it.
And how are you adding water to your wine cooler right now?
Yeah, so I'm using terracotta pieces right now to add water. I find that instead of just having like a shallow dish with water in it, terracotta pieces release water much slower. I have some here, so I just get like a couple kind of new pieces of terracotta, like just pots, and I smash them up and boil them. So that way they're a little more sanitary. From that, I just add boiling tap water to kind of, one, just keep it a little more sanitary than per usual. And I let them sit for about a half an hour, and then I drain them. And so while they're still visibly moist, I'll set them in my pumidor. For me, this is not necessarily like the best route for maybe everybody, but for me, I would say that this gets my humidity up to about 70, 73 RH.
And how many of these, so we're holding some terracotta pieces here. How many do you add usually to get it up to 70, 73?
I would say that I have probably about, I can actually measure here. Hold on one moment. I'm going to grab my scale.
So you have like 3 pieces right there, or 4 pieces?
Yeah, 4 probably like inch and a half pieces, and I'm just measuring them by grams right now.
And then you would put those within some sort of thing, so it's not resting on a cake per se.
Correct, yeah. So instead of having these pieces just kind of willy-nilly, kind of like they are on my scale right now, I would put them in like a little extra like piece of ceramic that I have.
Or like a big gaiwan. If you guys have a big gaiwan you don't use.
Yeah, and probably do have something like lying around. Given that folks just get like teaware inundated when I think you announced to like families and like friends that you're like, hey, I'm doing tea now. I was like, oh, I have some stuff for you. And, so I have a lot of stuff that I don't use. So it's good for like, I can move, have a couple different pieces of terracotta in my setup, and I can move it around and adjust it to kind of experiment with how the RH is different. So to get back to this, the amount that I usually use is probably about 50 grams of terracotta.
And this is about 50 grams?
This is about 50 grams here.
So you guys can see that.
Yeah.
And you just sort of follow that process. Did you use the same process for crocks at all? Or is this sort of a new process?
I would say that I started to use it for crocks, but I found, again, because there isn't a tight seal and my environment is pretty dry, that the negative kind of pressure between like, okay, so you have all the humidity inside was just like leaving, and it was leaving really quick. So I still had to fill up every 5-6 days or so, like rehydrate the terracotta pieces, so I could get that 70% RH that I wanted for my kind of collection. Okay,
so you're sort of shooting for 70% RH. What about temperature? Is that a consideration at all, or are you just kind of rolling with the ambient temperature in this room?
It's not a concern for me. I'm rolling with the ambient temperature, which is usually around anywhere between 66 to 71 degrees Fahrenheit.
So pretty stable then.
Yeah.
Okay. I think for some people the ambient temperature could be a concern if you are someone that likes to save a lot of money during the winter months, and the temperature falls to 60 or below. That could be a major concern. Or if you're going out of town and your temperature just drops into the 40s, that could be a recipe for mold, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So that's something to keep in mind. I, like Garrett, don't usually have to worry about it because we're in a relatively mild climate here in Seattle.
Right.
So the temperature for my place, I would say, is also similar. But I have heard of instances of mold. Tangent, but there we go.
Yeah.
And so another important part that people have talked about for sort of your Pu'erh storage, especially sort of doing these hobbyist makeshift setups, is just the amount of cakes and like sort of the tea density in there. How many cakes do you have in your pumidor? Do you store any other tea in there? And like, what about samples, that sort of thing?
Sure. Yeah. So I store probably about 5, maybe 6 cakes right now in my little wine cooler pumidor. I say maybe because there's like half cakes and quarter cakes. That for me is working out really well. I still have the shelves in there that came originally with the wine cooler, and it's easy for me to access things. I don't have to work too hard, but I could definitely see somebody who has probably maybe upwards of maybe a tong and a half, 10, 12 cakes. It could get a little more difficult for what I'm also doing in there, which is I have these little ceramic tins, and I have just the pieces of certain cakes in those tins. So I have these little ceramic tins, and they provide me easier access to some of the larger cakes that I still have. I was originally doing that and just having the tins kind of out in my normal setup out in the ambient air in my room. But of course, when it would get down to 45 RH, I did notice a less aromatic tea. And so I've been keeping the tins as well as the cakes inside my wine cooler. So it's taking up a lot of room right now. But for me and for like my modest collection, I think it works well.
So you find that keeping the sort of tins in the cakes helps to sort of condition them for brewing because it sort of maintains humidity. Do you find it also helps to air it out? Does that accomplish sort of that task as well? Just because like they're sort of broken up and sort of in loose form already?
Yeah, I would say that especially if I haven't kind of worked with the tea in a while, that getting the tea out in the kind of environment where I'm going to be drinking it, kind of exploring what has been happening to the tea itself has been helpful for me, just so I can be more engaged with my tea drinking. Yeah, so that's kind of there.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Right on. And is there anything else you'd like to add? I think that covers all the questions I sort of had.
I think so. We could... Yeah, I also store a little bit of aged oolong in mason jars, and I just have like a normal kind of ring set up there.
And those are outside of your pumidors?
Those are outside my pumidors, because I want to keep those as dry as possible instead of as humid as possible.
Yeah. And so that's probably another sort of good example of a way that you can accomplish effective storage, without spending a lot of money or using what you already have. So they're basically just cleaned out mason jars, and they work pretty well.
Yeah.
And so right now in Seattle, it is, in this room, we are 72 degrees and 54 RH. And within your pumidor, it's something like 70 RH or something like that.
Yes, you got it.
So you can see that there's a difference between just storing your pu'erh in here out in the open air versus in there. So I think that just about wraps up this episode. We're going to get a bunch of footage of Garrett's tea storage, and we're going to keep drinking some tea. So we will see you guys later. Cheers.
Cheers.